Hey, what's going on? It's Scott. I worked in law enforcement for several years. So I have with me Zach Miller. He's back on the channel to talk about constitutional policing. So to begin,
Mhm.
I have interviewed you before. Please, if anyone has not seen that earlier interview, remind us of the rule of thumb when it comes to when it's okay to ask for someone's ID and when it's okay to demand someone's ID.
Sure, absolutely. Very fundamental question that officers need to understand is that. So I don't legally, and I'm gonna talk about under the Fourth Amendment, the federal standard, which for the most part does not vary state to state. A few states might be more restrictive on it, but this is the minimum requirement. I don't have to have a legal reason why I ask someone for their identification. Asking, requesting, I can always ask, but demanding that someone provide their identification on the threat of some kind of penalty if you don't give it to me, that requires at least reasonable suspicion that that person has been or is about to be involved in criminal activity.
I remember there was an officer who I used to work with, fortunately, never directly. He didn't have a good reputation around the police department where I worked for several years. An officer got out with someone sitting in their car at a Walmart parking lot late at night. The Walmart was 24/7. So the officer just said, "Hey, I'm just asking why you're in your car." And the person said, "I'm on a work break. I work here." The officer asks, "Can I see your ID?" The employee of Walmart says, "No, I haven't done anything wrong." So this officer, who I didn't like to work with if I ever did go on a call with anyway, he shows up and he just flat out says, "Oh, you're not giving your ID? That's resist, obstruct, and delay." And they arrest the guy. They get down to booking. I can't remember if he was a sergeant or a captain at that point. But anyway, he comes down, says, "Well, what do you got?" Because the guy demanded to talk to a supervisor. And they told him what they had. And the supervisor immediately uncuffs the man and says, "Bring him back to Walmart right now." I don't know if a lawsuit happened, but I do know that that officer that said, "Hey, this is resist," he got in trouble and he didn't work for that department much longer after that. But I'll just never forget. I was like, how can you arrest someone for doing nothing wrong?
Whether you found that to be slightly suspicious or not, okay, that's one thing, but it certainly doesn't rise to the level of reasonable suspicion in the context that it's occurring. 24-hour store, a person says they're an employee. I'm assuming have no reason to believe they're not an employee while you're talking to them. And yeah, when you mentioned the part about the supervisor coming down, I'm thinking to myself, we need to get this guy unarrested as fast as humanly possible. I always tell officers, we're law enforcement officers. Law is in the title of our profession. We're enforcing the law. We should also, it's not unrealistic for the public to expect that we know the law and we follow the law as well.
When it comes to vehicle stops, say an officer stops a vehicle that matches the description of a suspect vehicle from a nearby larceny incident that was just called in. The occupants match the description of the suspects. Can an officer question the driver or anyone in the car, or do they have to read Miranda rights first?
Good question. So there's several questions in your question.
Yes.
So obviously we have to starting from the beginning we would ask, is the stop lawful? And on those facts, I think we can easily articulate a basis for having reasonable suspicion, at least, which is the minimum we need to stop a car.
Right.
A lot of officers are taught or led to believe that you need probable cause to stop a vehicle, which isn't true. I only need reasonable suspicion to stop a pedestrian. Why would I need more to stop a car? It doesn't logically make sense. So anyway,
Good
we
point.
have
Yeah.
reasonable suspicion based upon recently occurring crime, vehicle matches description. So we've got a lawful detention. The whole point of an investigative stop is to question the people we believe are involved in criminal activity, to either confirm or dispel this suspicion that we have. So the Miranda question is a very good one. So we have someone lawfully detained. Do we have to read them their Miranda rights before we question them? In a situation like this, here's the official answer. It depends.
Right.
We would need a little bit more laying out of facts. I'm going to be leaning towards the answer is no, because these are things that are probably not happening. Just being not free to leave, just being detained by the police is not in and of itself sufficient to create what's called Miranda custody. I think a lot of officers are well understand the rule is that Miranda is required when you have custody and you're intending to interrogate the person, which there's no question in this scenario, we're going to be interrogating these folks. Okay. The question is, are they in custody? And it's going to depend on the facts and circumstances, but probably not in a situation like this. Custody is not this, for Miranda purposes, is not the same thing as not being free to leave. Not free to leave, that's the Fourth Amendment question. That's how we determine if someone is seized, which these folks definitely are. Miranda, which is a Fifth Amendment issue. Miranda custody it occurs when a person is under arrest or when we have restrained their freedom of movement to the degree normally associated with arrest. Now, that's the legal terminology used by the Supreme Court, written by lawyers for lawyers. I like to tell officers that Miranda custody is when someone is either under arrest or we're using or employing arrest-like measures, things like putting them in handcuffs. People normally associate handcuffs with being arrested, although we know that just because someone is handcuffed doesn't necessarily mean they're arrested. But that is how they're portrayed in American society, television. People think handcuffs equals arrest. So that's an arrest-like measure. Locking someone in the back of your patrol vehicle is an arrest-like measure because they can't open the doors from the inside. So we're in both of these, handcuffing, locking the back of the police car, we're restraining their freedom of movement. We're physically restraining it. Another arrest-like measure could be the presence of multiple police officers in the immediate area surrounding the person being questioned. So if we surround one person with, our entire squad while we're questioning them, that's another arrest-like measure. So in a situation like this, a traffic stop, absent putting them in handcuffs when we question them or locking them in the back of the car, or we have a bunch of officers surrounding each person while we're questioning. No, Miranda is not going to be required in a situation like this. Although we're interrogating them, we're asking them guilt-seeking questions, which is what an interrogation is. We don't have the custody element in a situation like this.
What authority do officers have on a lawful vehicle stop to order the driver out of the car?
This one's a really broad authority here. The Supreme Court has told us in 1977 in a case called Pennsylvania versus Mims that on a lawful vehicle stop, the officer doesn't have to have any particularized reason to order the driver out of the car. Basically, if the officer feels like the driver needs to exit the vehicle, the officer has the unquestioned authority to order the person to exit the vehicle. It's not like a frisk where I don't have to have a reasonably this person could drive away or there's some kind of threat. It's basically the Supreme Court deferring to the officer's judgment in a situation like this.
That question was not necessarily for the officers. I think officers are very understanding of that.
I think
it's just, if anyone is not in law enforcement and they come across this video or podcast interview, then if an officer tells you to step out of the car, please don't argue. And all right, if you want the full interview, there's a link below in the show notes or right up here. I think you do not want to miss the full interview.